few months ago, a woman who is the granddaughter of a seamstress who was at the atomic bomb site, who actually was the seamstress that made the cover for the first atomic bomb, so it could be moved out and put on the aircraft and then dropped on Nagasaki and then Hiroshima. And this particular woman said, look, my grandmother lived to be 90-some. She had been at the atomic bomb site and then was moved to Roswell, and she was there when the crash happened near Roswell in 1947. And all she would ever say is that she absolutely knows that the ETs are real. That's all she would say. So, you know, the family never knew anything else. This woman's grandmother passed away, and a few years later, they were going through the attic and picked up a book, and out falls a 5x10 photograph. And it's a photograph of some kind of humanoid being that we do not know from whence it came. And she was convinced it had to be one of the bodies from the Roswell event. And we started looking at it, and of course, being a doctor, I was looking at, I wasn't a doctor in 1947, but it didn't look quite right. I thought it looked more European. And then I enlisted the help of a number of people to research this. And Pat Pearsall here helped find Dr. Burns, who is the most renowned medical archivist in the world in New York. And he looked at it and he says, no, the medical garb, the setup, all of it isn't an autopsy. He wanted to be very scientific. It's a dissection of something from the 1920s, between 1922 and 1929. Then we had a member of our team who has very good connections with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they have a whole division on clothing and eras and all that. They looked at, they said, absolutely, this is mid-1920s. So we're talking 20 to 25 years before Roswell. And what are we looking at here? Unfortunately, I'm not wired. I thought I would be, but I can't walk over to it. But you have, if you want to zoom in on the head and the body, oh dear. Oh boy. This is why I never touch a computer. Oh, it left. Well, he'll come back. See, I don't understand all this. Give me a big thing like this. But while he's bringing it back up, I will speak from this one. So you have what look like, you know, military or intelligence civilians here, here, and here. You have medical personnel. This is the main doctor doing the dissection. This blob here is just damage on the emulsion. We had the paper tested, the original paper, because we had access to it. And the original paper is from early 50s. We know that. We also know that it's a photo of a photo, okay? And I'm just telling you what we know. I'm giving you the facts first, and I'm going to give you an educated assessment after. And it's a very unusual head and eyes. You can't see great detail, but you can see some. It's got a towel over it. Obviously, it had probably a lot of facial and neurotrauma. You can see the body cavity and the ribs, very unusual in how it's structured, almost like an external, these bumps on the outside, certainly not a normal human. And the hands and the feet and the legs. So we're dealing with something, you know, that isn't a Homo sapien, a human. We don't know what it is. I'm not calling it an extraterrestrial at this point because we need more information, which is why I was given permission to disclose it to you today. And if it is what we think it is, in point of fact, one of the most important things ever to surface, because it predates Roswell by 2 decades or more. And it is also clearly some kind of formal operation going on, dissecting this. And now I have been told by a number of my contacts in the intelligence community who have been in the vault, as they call it, that there are files classified, still top secret, on this issue from the late 1800s and early 1900s. They never went through them, but they know that they were related to extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs going that far back. This is now 100 years ago. So I will pass this around, and you're free to look at it. Those of you at home, you can zoom in and out as I now talk about my assessment. So I believe what happened, because I've been involved in a number of cases as a medical doctor, an emergency doctor, and forensic cases, that when the Roswell event happened, and this woman, Miss Heaven is her name, was there at Roswell and had been at the atomic bomb project, she was cleared to a very high level of secrecy, even though she was doing a rather ordinary task as a seamstress. But when Roswell happened, if there was actionable intelligence and files in an archive on prior retrievals or events, those would have been couriered in so that they would have had a comparative anatomy and a comparative point of reference in studying the retrieval of the objects from the Roswell crash. What I think happened, now this we don't know, we're asking for the public to help, is that they needed these older files, and someone she knew who was probably in the photo lab at the Walker Field said, "Wow, look at this." And he took a picture of the picture and gave it to her, but she secreted it away until she died, and it fell out of a book. Now those are the facts that are known facts. It came from someone at Roswell, but it's not Roswell. It came from someone clear to the level of the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project, and to be at Roswell, which at the time, the 509th Bomber Squadron was the only place in the world that had atomic bombs in 1947. And yet it isn't that era. But that's even more explosive. It means these covert programs that have studied this issue go back much further. Now, what we're asking for specifically for the public, look at these men. People out there may have family pictures who will know who one of these people are. If we can identify one of them, then we can connect it further and begin to go deeper into what this really means. Or if you're in a classified project and have access to the vault, and you know who you are, contact me if you have any detailed information on this. I am telling you everything we know. Most of what we should know about this case, we have no idea. This was a serendipitous, strange thing that happened where these people we know the provenance of the photograph, we've tested it, we know it's from the 20s, we know that the woman in whose belongings it was found, who had deceased, was in fact at Roswell, we prove it, and that she had been on the atomic bomb project. More than that, we don't know. I'm giving you an informed assessment of probably what this is. But we need the public. This is where we can crowdsource digging into this. And maybe someone has an answer that's very ordinary. I doubt it. I'm not that particular being. So anyway, that is something that I think is a really important case. It's in development. We've hit a wall. The family and my team, we can't go any further without someone being able to tell us who any one of those people might be. And you may have a family album from your great-great-grandfather, whoever from the 20s, who would have been an adult then, because all those men are dead by now, obviously, who might know who they are. And from there, we might be able to connect them to an operation, an agency, a military branch, what have you. So that's what we're asking you guys to help us with. So what I want to do next is to show a number of clips of some interesting interviews.
Project Paperclip, most likely we got 5,000 or more scientists. I heard we got trainloads of paperwork, mature nonlinear physics experiments, Walter Gerlach's research, the death camp research. We got all that, as well as the Bell project, plasma accelerator, all that kind of stuff in that deal. My granddad and I, when we were talking, I'll never forget it, and he said, he was talking about Patton, And of course, he said, I was in Czechoslovakia with Patton in April '45. And I thought, oh, that was neat. What did you do? And then he's like, well, Patton had to secure a lot of the stuff that the SS had. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And today we know it as the SSE-4 division under General Hans Kammler. And of course, Gestapo Mueller also had 3 levels of security around that town, which was pretty dense. And of course, the SS we know today had their own funding streams. They were totally independent of the Reichstag. And a lot of that treasure in Switzerland, they had access to unlimited funds,
right.
Which sounds a lot like the deep state today. And so I said, what were you doing with Patton? He says, oh, it was interesting. Memory serves that Granddad told me they were with General Marshall, but I could be wrong on that. But I remember that he said he was with Patton, probably maybe Marshall, maybe some other generals. And they said, well, we went into this warehouse and there were all these exotic, jet aircraft, rocket engines, parts of the V2 and maybe a V3, I don't know. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he says, I saw a disc-shaped aircraft. And I said, I'd done some history work by that time. I said, oh, is that the one they built? I can't remember who built it, Arado or maybe someone else, that had the BMW jet engines and the Arado ones in a circle, and it didn't really work and everything like that. And he said, no. And that was it. It was time for lunch, the guests had arrived, the wine flowed, blah, 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 blah. And I went away as a college student. I was like, well, that's interesting. And it didn't hit me until I read Nick Cook's book, I think in 2004. And I was like, okay, this is getting really weird because, in 1993, when I was 31, I showed the Majestic 12 documents to my dad, and we went back and forth on that. And I said, I've heard of Roswell and Pelona Peak and Corona. I've heard of some of these UFO crashes, but are these real? And he said, oh no, I checked with the Pentagon, the FBI, it's all hoax. And we went back and forth for months on this, and he finally said, look, just don't go down that road. He says, live your life, enjoy yourself, but don't, they have it all under control. They know what they're doing. And I said, Dad, how the hell can I live my life if this is the truth of our world?
So this disc in the warehouse, obviously we got it, and it ended up somewhere in the United States.
Probably Wright-Patterson, or Wright Field as they called it back then. I am not a documents expert, but I know 60s mimeograph sheets like you and I had in school. I mean, they smell funny.
Yes.
He's a guy in my car club, and he was, in the Air Force. His father was a 3-star general in the Air Force. I'm not going to say his name. I promise I never would.
Yes, I understand that.
I mean, it's just my story, But he and I started talking about this, and he says, my wife and I have seen all kinds of strange phenomena. We've had, glowing Foo Fighters come into our home, and all this stuff. And he says, I want to show you something. And so his father left him a large safe. That he said, well, I had to get my Navy SEAL buddy over here with some C4, and they blew the hinges off. And you could see where they blew the damn hinges off. And I said, holy shit. And inside were Air Force documents with, disc craft and a lot of technical terms in German, which I thought was interesting. And he said, these were from 58 to 63, I think. And the dates were on them, and I recognized the terms, vortex compression, plasma accelerator, 0 point gravitational field, all this stuff. And the schematic had an Air Force serial number. And we were just flipping through them, hundreds of them. Now these looked a lot like the German Haunebu ones, the Vril saucers, 3 maneuvering nodes underneath, powdered quartz with monatomic gold and insulators, torsion field maneuvering nodes that we know now. I figured that out. I actually sketched that out, a TR3B black triangle, how it worked with the plasma ring and the 3 nodes with monatomic gold and powdered quartz to Chris Mellon. And he's like, oh wow, you and Tom DeLonge were into the wild stuff. I just shook my head and I was like, okay, whatever. But atomic weapons, and I'm sure you know this, Oppenheimer was famous for saying, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Correct.
Well, that's from the Vedic texts.
Yep.
And what he found out from the Vedic texts that the Ahnenerbe SS and all those Tula Society and everyone else and all the societies knew, and Rudolf Steiner and Gurdjieff probably knew, the theosophists, was that when you light off a nuclear weapon of a certain yield, it not only affects the local battlefield at hand, but it rips through several dimensions of the universe, the local universe, and you get additional casualties. And that's why when we started, I think the Germans tested one in the Baltic in October of '44. I think that was true. The Navy did the Zinsser report on it. We go through these Yuga cycles, and all of a sudden it's like Atlantis again. We're starting to do, material science, regressive, actions, chimera construction with DNA, atomic weapons again, and scalar and free energy weapons, which can crack the Earth in half.
Correct. Dangerous stuff.
Dangerous stuff. As you said, firecrackers, but it's more than firecrackers. These kids are playing with C4 and they're 3 years old.
Yeah, they're 3-year-olds playing with C4.
Chunks of it as big as this table, enough to blow up an entire house. It's incredibly dangerous. And so Oppenheimer knew that. And the other person that worked with Oppenheimer at the Rad Lab at MIT, not only was Vannevar Bush, he was a big-time UFO file, was John G. Trump, the president's uncle.
Correct.
So that's how President Trump knew a lot about all this that we're talking about. It's because his uncle and he were close. And his uncle was read in along with Vannevar Bush and Oppenheimer and everybody on the Foo Fighter file, as it was known back then, and the German atomic program, our atomic program, the Klystron 2 scalar weaponry, radar research, and all that stuff at the Rad Lab. That was the Area 51, at MIT where the eggheads were, but Wright Field in Ohio was the place in those days. But that's something every American should understand is John G. Trump, because a lot of his physics work is still classified.
Yes.
And why?
Right. Yes.
I'm of the opinion they're given a very thin file to work from. And, Chris and I have met, we've talked about all this stuff. I think the TTSA program was a little goofy with Tom DeLonge. I don't know what, Hal Puthoff was soliciting me for funds for his quantum communication thing, which I think the Navy has had for 30 years. So there's a lot of disconnects going on. And of course, they've left that TTSA program, and I don't blame them. I think it was a shit show. And some type of CIA, quasi-psyop, something. And I don't think anybody was really excited about it. I was a little hard on him, and I will, because I was expecting much more disclosure after 4 years of this. And when they say, this is a mystery we need to solve, that is not true. As you and I know, the US military, especially the Navy, has reams of information on every shape of craft, where it's from, who's driving it, what they're up to, Forget it. It's just been going on for 70 years. The military-industrial complex is not stupid. Neither are the branches of the military. They know exactly what's going on. And this Tic Tac, the word is, it's Lockheed Martin. It's the successor to the TR-3G Black Triangle model.
Correct.
And of course, there are stories by Charles Hall that the tall white ETs out at the Indian Springs, at the S4 and the Nellis Range, had these, lo and behold, these white Tic Tac looking things that they used as buses. And so I'm thinking, aha, maybe there's a connection there. And maybe that validates some of his story. And so when you start piecing all this together, I'm glad that they're doing something. But it's, Elizondo just will talk the bark off a tree. He goes in circles. He's a great counterintelligence guy. I'd love to get into a debate with him, but of course that's never going to happen. I think Chris means well. I really do. I don't think he's one of these guys, that's going around here, I'm going to fool the public and get paid for it. He doesn't need the money. I don't need money. We don't need fame or money. That's the last thing a melon wants. I'm telling you. We're very private as a family. I can pretty much guarantee you that. His brother was in the press a little bit, but I think he sees this as a patriotic job. I think he believes that report is genuine, and there's maybe not much more, and that he's okay with this is what I'm allowed to talk about, and the rest of it is national security, and that cannot be talked about. They've lied by omission, and when they say it's a mystery, that's a lie. Okay, sorry, but that, I'm not on board with that, and that,
But they have to know that's a lie.
Right. So they do, and I think it's obvious. So, that's why I'm giving this interview with you today. I mean, I've had enough of that. I had enough with my dad. Was he a liaison to Majestic 12 as a Magic member? Probably.
He was.
He probably had 2 pages of the UFO file. Don't worry about the rest of it. Just need 2 pages are all you need. Okay, yes, sir. And Chris is going, yes, sir, too. Whatever factions in the Pentagon, as you know, everything is factions. Whatever factions they represent, it's like, well, we want to have disclosure, but not really real disclosure. And so they're slowing everything down. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why Chris is involved either, except, in my opinion, this is just me, I think there's a reason they picked a Mellon. Because we've had other families, this is a tradition in our family. As you said, the Mellons were the first family of intelligence. Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with that. Mm-hmm. From my, the people that I've talked to, that will go along with, we need to do this for the good of the country. Yes, you got to lie and do whatever you have to do, but this is what we need to do, and they'll just do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm a private citizen. I've never worked for the government or the military, but I'm not going to get up there. I mean, I'm not going to stay silent when members of my family lie to the American people. I won't do that. It's one thing for my dad, in the old days, to get up there and do some mild fibs about, highways. This is not. You're messing around with the survival capability of the human race.
Correct.
I mean, that's not an overstatement.
Right.
This is deadly serious. It's not funny.
Right. You're sort of half joking, but I thought you were somewhat serious that you said, a lot of my family are fascists, or were fascists, or fascist sympathizers. And you talk about that a little bit, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, Andrew Mellon was upfront about it. He was Secretary of the Treasury under Harding and Hoover. He was ambassador to the court of St. James in 1931, a good friend of the royal family. That's where this Mellon royal family thing connection comes in. His outdated policies with Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, DuPont's, that made the Great Depression much worse, I believe. I've also heard that, he was heavily invested in DuPont's nylon, which came around in the late 30s for naval rope. And of course, hemp and marijuana were made strategic materials and therefore illegal. Of course, it was a war on consciousness too. Oh, we don't want people smoking those jazz cigarettes. That would be bad, And so, Andrew, and of course, their dealings with Sullivan and Cromwell on Wall Street, the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Oh, invest in Nazi Germany. Hitler's a great guy. He's a Republican. Don't worry about it. You'll make lots of money. And then Standard Oil, through straw man in Portugal, all during the war. I mean, business thrives during war. You know that. It's a racket. And so, my grandfather wasn't the industrialist kind of war profiteer that Andrew was, but he was more into the mystic intelligence side for sure. And if you're bottom line, brass tacks, if you're on the CFR with Allen Dulles, you're in the Trilateral Commission, you're on the Jason Society, you're Scroll Key at Yale, which Scroll Key and the Skull and Bones are directly connected to the Tula Society of Germany and the Vril Society. And you're a Knight of the Order of Orange Nassau. You've got a KBE from the Queen. My dad does too. You're not a friend of the common American. You're just not. You're a very, neocon, ultra-conservative. I don't buy this whole, yes, he was a gentleman horse racer. He had a racing team of stables. He was, donated the National Gallery, the East Wing. His father donated the other National Gallery. These are things they did, in my opinion, so that the American people would put a gold wreath on their heads and go, what great oligarchs these guys are, billionaires, oligarchs. See what great things they do. Now, that's a great thing to do, to donate an art museum, but it's a great cover story. I mean, Andrew Mellon had intimate dealings with Hjalmar Schacht, who was Hitler's private banker. And so did Sullivan and Cromwell. I mean, this is dirty, nasty history. And it doesn't make, it took me years really to gather all the intelligence bits and to come up, a lot of it I'm connecting dots on my own, but they make sense to me given my German history and the history of the military-industrial complex and everything, and why the Mellons are so active still. And, secrecy and big money and these big American families, some call them the Committee of 300. That's probably a loose term, but, I've never heard it, but, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I've had that confirmed, that it is a committee around 300 that are involved in these operations. And it's not just extraterrestrial UFO, it's a whole lot of aspects of technology, finance, global, geopolitical.
My friend who was an ONI Navy captain, we had a dinner one night and he said, I said, what can you tell me? And he spent 30 years in the ONI, and he said, well, we're pretty proud of our satellites. We're competing with the Air Force, and they're two-man satellites. We've got our own two-man satellites. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And they have scalar weaponry, and he was like, well, I can't comment to that. More wine, more wine. And he said, I said, tell me about your tracking systems. And he says, oh, that's I love that. And he's like, we can track those bastards, UFOs, punching in and out superluminal, and we can track them 25 miles under the Earth.
Under the Earth.
Or the ocean.
Yes. And tell me a little bit about Mount Weather. You use that. I think a lot of people don't know why that was important at that time.
The official narrative is that Mount Weather was built in the Blue Ridge during the Kennedy administration as a continuance of government, COG. And I think it still is. My dad's been down under there. My dad also tells me about the high-speed train they have, because he's told me that, I said, because I was out of touch with him for 5 days, he said, well, they had us out DC to an undisclosed location. It wasn't Mount Weather, it was in West Virginia, in 7 minutes. And I said, oh, is that the maglev train that goes Mach 2 in a vacuum tube? And, oh, well, how did you know that? And my dad always wonders how I know this stuff. But Mount Weather, the rumors are that it goes down, probably a mile or two, down to the sub-shuttle system and connects to other deep underground military bases. Why else it's in the Blue Ridge in that specific location, I'm not sure. But it's a top secret facility. It's still very active and expanding. And if they're expanding on the surface, as you know, they're probably expanding tenfold beneath the surface.
Right, correct. Yep. Had your grandfather, Paul Mellon, been in Mount Weather?
Oh, I'm sure, but he never told me that.
Right.
I don't remember that as part of our conversation, but certainly that's all connected with his jet strips and his meetings and Mount Weather. These are all connected things. For all I know, there's a tunnel from his farm to Mount Weather. I mean, I have no idea, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were true. And I don't take pleasure in any of this. This family history is very disturbing and actually disheartening.